Chandra Maddila is working at Microsoft Research in Redmond, which is pretty close down the road from here. Very far right now with the closed border, but close geographically. And he has a PhD from TU Delft in the Netherlands, where he focused on software analytics and empirical software engineering. So this is exactly the topic that we have in the class. So really glad that you could come today, Chandra. He's been at Microsoft for 7 years, and before that he worked at CA Technologies, where he built automation and orchestration products and services to help managers manage their IT infrastructure and DevOps. So I didn't actually know that until I looked you up on LinkedIn, so you have a very long experience in this area. And his role is a research software engineer, and his interests are at the intersection of developer productivity, empirical software engineering, and AI. And I've had the pleasure of working with and learning from Chandra, among others at Microsoft over the past few months while we're trying to understand the impacts of working from home on developer productivity. So I also sort of wanted to invite him for the developer productivity workshop, but I chose this one because he has so much experience. And also he shared with me a link to his podcast, which as soon as I listened to it, I thought, oh, I have to share this with my students. So they did listen to it, and I think they really enjoyed it as well. It's a great podcast. I love the Indian music on it, by the way. I'd love to have a link to that music. I just love that kind of music. And so I asked him if he would come, and he agreed. So thank you for being here, Chandra. So
thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we have some questions. I'm going to start with a couple and then hand it over to the students. So we use Slack in the classroom, and so sorry, we should be using Teams for that too, perhaps. Maybe next time we will. So in Slack, we've been adding our questions, and students have been voting up the questions. So we'll turn to those in a minute. But I'm going to start off with a couple, if that's okay, before we go to the student questions.
Yep.
So I found the podcast actually to be an excellent summary of how our software industry has moved from box software to software as a service. And you described this really well. And how together with DevOps and AIOps, it's now possible, as you stated, to connect the right side of development with the left side. So bringing user telemetry data about their bugs or about which features they use directly into the environment that the developers are writing their code. So I'm quoting you. I just love the way that you described that in the podcast. It was like, bang, that's it in a nutshell, what's going on here. And so from a developer's point of view, that's an amazing insight, right? For them to get feedback on the code that they're writing so quickly. So it's really shifted things. It's been disruptive in how we develop software. So you mentioned Sankie as a platform at Microsoft that supports that capability, and that there are, I think, 8 different recommenders that the developers use. And the students are quite curious about those. We'll get to those questions. I was wondering though, first, could you talk a little bit about how, because we're looking a lot at different research methods in this course. So I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about which methods you use to understand how developers make use of these recommenders. Could you share that with us?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, that is something we ourselves struggled a lot when we were developing these recommenders, right? Because sometimes it's always like I have a personal preference to actually objectively measure things, if at all possible, right? But sometimes what happens is some of these recommenders, by virtue of their nature, there is so much goodness that they create, which you may or may not measure using traditional methods, right? So probably I can give some examples, right? So we have one of these recommenders called related files recommender. What happens is, let's say when you create a pull request by changing a bunch of files, we basically mine previous commit history and do something similar to a market basket analysis, right? Where let's say you buy milk and eggs together, so probably you should also buy bread, and the history suggests that, right? So similarly, you changed files foo.cs and bar.cs, and probably you should change some other file like test.cs or something along with that, right? So we passed that recommendation as a code review comment, right? Then how do you understand whether that's really useful, right? So one way we did that was we see exactly when we added that recommendation in a timeline, let's say, and see if any of the subsequent commits in the same pull request have that file included. If it is, then we say, okay, looks like someone might have looked at our recommendation. You still do not fully know, right? Because sometimes people just might have realized on their own, right? They may not even have seen the recommendation, right? That you don't know unless you ask people. So the natural next step is you basically schedule interviews with some of the developers who actually acted on your recommendations, and see how many of them actually looked at your comment and acted on it, or is it something else, right? We also try to capture explicit feedback on our recommendations by providing like and dislike buttons on our recommendations. Also, like a small text input bar at the bottom, so people can either like and dislike. Also, they can comment. And we built an automated pipeline, which basically scrapes all this data and present in a nice dashboard where you see how many people liked and disliked it. And if they have any verbatims left for us, like, read through them, etc., right? So there is no one straightforward answer, basically.
Yeah. So lots of different methods, but I can imagine that if you see that they take the recommendations, it's fairly strong evidence, right? That it helped them. Yeah, along with the like and dislike. Do you think that the use of AI then in the developers, workflow, is it changing fundamentally how they write code, do you think?
I don't know if it is fundamentally changing, but from my experience, it's like an auxiliary thing, right? Like it helps people do certain things more efficiently, right? And most so AI, right? I am a strong advocate of AI not replacing people and existing systems, but just augmenting and complementing things, right?
Yeah.
So if there is an inefficiency or if there is a laborious task that a developer has to go through, right? In my opinion, for instance, when a developer creates a pull request, finding a reviewer is actually a laborious task, right? I mean, sometimes you know who should review your pull requests, but sometimes you have to go through org hierarchies, etc., and try to figure out, okay, because I changed certain aspects of the code, this person should review it. There, something like AI can significantly help. AI can say, hey, because your pull request is changing so and so files or touching this part of the functionality, or it's a security issue, or it's a privacy issue, or something like that, and this person is actually a security expert. So here is the list of people you should add as reviewers.
Great.
Right?
Yeah, thank you. That actually, I love that example. That's such a clear example of how the recommender can really help the developers save them work. So I'm going to switch. I'm going to pivot to the student questions now, and they have a lot of them. We won't get to all of them, and I'm happy to share all of them with you afterwards if you're curious. But let me start. I'm just going to go in order, folks, of what we have in Slack with the pinned ones. Thank you, Omar, for pinning them. So Tyler, would you like to start with the first one that has 15 votes? So it's pretty good.
Yeah, so Chandra, my question, I wanted to know a little bit about in the ecosystem today, with the AIOps and things like that. It sounds like you're using them at Microsoft, but I really want to know a little bit about, is it something that we can actually use as developers at other companies? And then further on that, do you know of any companies that are successfully using it in the field? And if you do, apart from Microsoft, obviously, because that's where you're studying, have you heard from them, and do they have the same experience? Those are the things I'm interested in.
Right. So most of the work, for instance, we did in Microsoft as part of Sankie, everything is published. So you have we have 8 recommenders, right? So we have 8 papers for each one of them, and we have 1 paper explaining the entire platform. So everything is out in the wild. In terms of other companies doing similar stuff, I know for a fact that, for instance, Facebook is also betting heavily on stuff like that. I also learned these things by following some of these conference papers like ICSI or FSC, right? Or sometimes people write blogs, right? So Facebook, I believe, is working on some of these things like neural code search, and suggesting fixes to bugs automatically, like get a fix, app fix, all those things. And I'm pretty sure Google A lot of these large enterprises like Amazon, etc., must be working on things like that.
Great, thanks, Tyler. Great question, and I love your answer, Chandra, because as a class for our first course project, we're reviewing all of the papers from ICSE 2020. So some of the students will certainly come across some of those papers that you're talking about that look at the use of AI, because it was quite a few, I think, in 2020. So let me go next to Jonathan, if you'd like to ask your question. I know he was there.
Hey, hello.
Hi.
Yeah, sure. I have no pride and no shame. Okay. So the question that I had was related to telemetry that companies are already collecting about their users. So like from my co-op experience, a lot of web companies are already collecting lots of information about their users all the time for use in A/B testing and all kinds of other things. And my question was, how much work do you think companies like this need to do to modify the data that they're already collecting so that it can be used for AI analysis? Or should they be like looking to collect new data for AI, or like can they retrofit the old data that they have already?
Right. So I think like in the beginning, when, for instance, AI was booming and everyone wants to do AI, probably there were like a lot of checks and balances. Like if you're asking about like privacy concerns and things like that. But these days, I think there is a increasing sentiment across the industry because of self-realization or because of government intervention or things like that. Privacy is considered, I think, with utmost importance. And also these days, there is so much improvement in terms of technology, like differential privacy or doing AI eyes off. Like so in Microsoft Research, for instance, there are some projects where people are actually working on technologies like that. Also like secure multi-party computation and homomorphic encryption and things like that. So there is a lot of good work going on, I must say. But are we yet there? Like that, I don't know. Like, of course, there is always scope for improvement, and but the way things are moving, I'm pretty confident that we'll be in a good shape quite soon.
Thanks, Chandra. Thanks, Jonathan, for the question. Good question. Let's go to Ansh's question next. Ansh, are you there? You were
hello.
Minutes ago. Hi.
Yeah. Well, it's Ansh, first of all.
Ansh, thank you. No thank you for correcting me. I'll get it by the end of the
To add to Jonathan's question a little bit, once you do filter the relevant user data, what is the goal with this data? What are you training the AI for with all this user data? You talked a lot about details about mining data on the development phase, such as pull requests and commits, but you didn't really talk about the usage of the telemetry and its benefits after moving away from box software.
What's the last part of the question? Could you please repeat?
Like what are you training the AI with or for? What's the goal with this user data?
Right. So for instance, like the examples I mentioned, like you want to, let's say, build a recommender that that suggests who should review your pull requests, right? You need like a lot of historical data about commits, pull requests, who is reviewing what kind of pull requests, etc. Then you basically build models that can predict when a new pull request is created, who should review it, right? Or the related files analysis that I explained. It's also another classic example. We also have some sort of recommenders like, so one recommender which we built uses effort estimation, which is like another area in software engineering. So uses effort estimation techniques combined with AI to understand if the pull requests are moving slow, fast. If they're moving slow, then what you can do to pick up the pace and things like that.
I meant more so not from the developer's perspective, but like all this telemetry you're getting from the user end, like the user side client data. What are you doing with that data, and what's the goal with the AI?
I unfortunately don't work on the user side of the products. My area is fully software engineering, so I probably differ.
Yeah, there's actually a really good video by Vince Orgavon. It's kind of a few years old where he talks about how they use the user data. I can put a link in Slack about that. So I'll share some of that out actually. Yeah, good question. Nimi, would you like to ask the next question, which is a bit related, I guess. So, but Nimi, are you there? Maybe I'll skip it because it's a bit related to the last one. And I think what Chandra, you're saying is that your team is not looking at the user data. You're focusing on the telemetry data that you get about software developers to improve what software developers are doing. So less so about the user. So Nimi, if it's okay, I don't see you there anyway. I will skip to the next question, which is to Rohit. Rohit, are you there?
Yes. Hello.
Great. Hi.
Okay. My question was, how well do you think those the AI systems which we are trying to develop would be able to generalize to every project around the world? So, do we have data that is diverse enough to be able to generalize from this?
Right. I think like this is also like a big topic of debate in AI, right? Like AI that is more diverse, more responsible, etc. Probably I can give answer from like software engineering, strictly software engineering perspective, and in context of Microsoft. So when we develop like AI models, right, for instance, and we immediately don't roll out any of our recommendations on large scale, right? So Microsoft is home for thousands of developers. So when we develop like a recommender system, it's not like it's going to hit everyone at the same time. So we basically first do like a classic alpha and beta testing kind of thing, where we take some developers into confident and we make sure that set that we construct, like our targeted users, are diverse enough. Then we basically roll out the changes one by one, and we do all kinds of feedback collection that I explained earlier. For instance, quantitative feedback, qualitative feedback, surveys, interviews, etc., to make sure the system that we have in place is meeting some of these standards. Then we eventually like start rolling out things. There is no like single like a silver bullet, unfortunately, which can guarantee that okay, you do this 1, 2, 3, then you are guaranteed to have privacy, you are guaranteed to be diverse, or and achieve all the other requirements, right? So it's a lot of it's basically an iterative process, right? So it takes like a lot of effort and work to go through each one of these.
Great. I'm going to follow up a bit related to that. And I'm not sure Chandra is going to necessarily know how to answer this because I don't think I could answer it. But Cassie, do you want to ask your question about cloud computing and startups? I know she's there.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry.
Yes.
I was just like finding the mute button. I was like,
I know.
Okay. Yeah, so I was just gonna say, you mentioned that startups have benefited from cloud computing due to not worrying about server costs, etc. Do you think that there would have been less startups today without cloud computing?
We can say cloud computing definitely accelerated things, right?
Okay.
But the increase in startups probably is not like always attributed alone just to cloud computing, right? There are like so many other things, like there is so much funding available today. There are so many venues like Y Combinator and things like that, where you can go and pitch your idea and immediately get like $100,000 check to materialize your idea, etc. But like on the technical front, at least like people are peaceful now, right? Like so I know the story. There is an Indian startup called Flipkart, which is massive now, like which is recently acquired by Walmart. This is like Amazon equivalent of Indian e-commerce site. And the guys who started it, like they had like bunch of servers in their 2-bedroom house in Bangalore, India, And they in one of the interviews mentioned that they always used to worry about the servers getting heated up. So they used to have like ACs, everything like fit in, air coolers, etc., to make sure the servers are functioning, right? So
Right.
like you don't have all those problems now, right? Like you just swipe your card and you have unlimited access to compute, storage, all those things, and they're guaranteed to be up almost all of the time. So at least now you can focus more on your business side of the things and how to grow users and business, right?
True. Yeah. Good points. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? I don't mean to take up all the question time.
No, go ahead. It's good.
So you just mentioned that you thought that the cloud computing sort of accelerated the space in a way. Do you think that the continued prevalence of DevOps and then using AI in operations as well can provide like a similar effect?
Maybe not at that scale, but I can totally see where AI can play like a significant role. Let's say let's say you have a big cloud and you build this complex application infrastructure, everything, right? Let's say now you always like get into issues that is given due to various factors unless you remove humans from the loop. So always there are always bugs and incidents and things like that. So then let's say, for instance, right, if there is an AI system that can magically tell you, hey, this specific code change or this specific issue has caused your incident, then suddenly your incident troubleshooting time will come down from, let's say, a couple of days or even like week to maybe a couple of hours, right? Interestingly, actually, we did a lot of work in the space. So we built this tool called ORCA, ORCA, Online Root Cause Analysis Tool. And there is a paper that we published in OSDI, Usenix OSDI in 2018, which exactly tackles this problem. So even things like that basically will help. Let's say if you're a startup, right? Like everything is critical, right? Like you don't have the luxury of hiring 10,000 people. Like you have 5-6 people who handle different things and take one hat off and put another hat on, right? So the time you save in doing these things like incident management or troubleshooting, I think will add significant value.
Thanks, Chandra, and thanks for the follow-on question. Actually, quite a few of the questions the students were asking about startups and how would this generalize to smaller companies or startup companies and how that would look. And I'm actually going to pivot to Matt's question because it's a bit of a follow-on. Matt, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, my question was whether you're using AI to infer anything about the social aspects of DevOps, and if the fact that you're using, or I think you're using mostly trace data to feed the AI, and if that's a barrier to what you can do with it.
I personally don't look into that specific area, but I know some people are very actively looking into things like that. For instance, Peggy, Dene Ford, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she does a lot of that work, and I think she's working on doing inclusion and diversity, etc., in online forums and things like that, right?
Yep.
Probably reading some of her work might be useful.
Yeah, actually, we invited her to come, but she couldn't come the week that we were having the workshop. But I will put some of her references in there for sure. Thanks for mentioning that, Chandra. And great question, Matthew. And actually, I'm going to ask Sarush next, if you want to jump in, because it sort of leads on a little bit from Matthew's question. And Chandra, I'm sorry that you're getting so many questions about human and social aspects, but I have already been brainwashing the students for the past 5 weeks. So I think some of them came with that view already. But Sarush, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. My question was sort of follow up on Matt's question, was about with AIOps, we're trying to replace manual and laborious tasks that DevOps already do now. I was thinking what is the extent of this replacement, and on what point are we going to continue to do it, and then what is the effect on the developers? How are they going to adopt these things? How would they affect their behavior adopting AIOps? Yeah.
Right, right. So from our experience, like rolling out some of these recommenders that we built in a large scale organization like Microsoft, where you have so many developers from different backgrounds and geographies, we received like a really positive feedback. Like people really appreciate when you take away some of these laborious things off their plate, right? Like for instance, right, incident management is pain, and in a large company, it's even more painful, because when something is broken, you have to chase so many logs, telemetry, etc. Right? Imagine like you have like you're a dad of 2 kids, and in the night you're waking up and sitting in front of your tiny laptop and looking through all these like logs and trying to figure out an issue at like 2 a.m. or something, right? Like that's super painful, right? So if there is an AI system which can tell you, at least guide you, right? Like, okay, you first look at this, then look at this, then probably do this, right? Ultimately, like you have to resolve it, right? So that way, like we actually receive like really good feedback from people. They really appreciate AI assisting them. They not necessarily don't see it like AI replacing them or anything. Similarly, right, like our reviewer recommendation, right? That recommender basically tells you who should review a pull request. So I don't think like we at least at this point achieved technical capability to an AI system to go and completely like review a pull request, right? So at this point, like we recommend people, right? And ultimately they will go and review, right?
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
even if let's say we go to a phase where AI can review pull requests, which is better, right? Like because now I have so many better things to do in life, like I go and build new features or work on something else or read some books, right?
Yeah.
You have time to read books?
We have to make time, Peggy.
I know. Thank God for insomnia. But thanks. That's such a clear description, I think, and really kind of solidifies how AI is not going to replace developers per se, but really augment them. Thanks for that. I'm going to switch to Dylan's question, if he's okay with that, and then I'm going to take one more and then one from me, and we'll have completed our half hour. So yeah, Dylan, do you want to jump in and ask it yourself rather than have me paraphrase it and mess it up?
Sure. You just pinned mine.
I did. Sorry, I didn't warn you.
No, I was wondering if AIOps would be an effective motivator for companies that haven't already adopted like a DevOps practices or DevSecOps practices. If AIOps was an effective motivator at bringing them into a new kind of practices or ecosystem.
I think so. I think so. But the only problem is like maybe like not all companies have the capability to build like pipelines and systems like Microsoft or Google or Facebook, right? So I think that is where like there are some companies that are coming up, including Microsoft itself, where smaller companies can subscribe to AIOps services, right? So Splunk is one example. SolarWinds, New Relic, all these folks are doing like amazing work in terms of AIOps. And GitHub, like Nicole is also, I know, is on the call, and GitHub is offering like fantastic solutions for open source community and smaller companies to realize their full AIOps potential.
All right, thanks, Chandra. Hopefully Nicole will chat to that later as well. Derek messaged me. Derek, are you there? You have a question, a burning question for Chandra that you want to ask. You want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm here. Not related to all the human aspects, but could you use AI to predict seed build dependencies? I was working in gaming, and the main tool always used is MS Build, which is not exactly scripting, but it's not you can't pull the dependencies exactly. So a lot of the time you have to build everything. And you can manually specify everything if you want to, and there are systems that do that. Developers hate it completely. They almost refuse to do it, and most of the industry happens to not do it at all. But it will cut your build time and resources by 70 to 90%, sometimes even more. Like if you're doing a change to PS4 exactly, then why is Xbox building? and testing and everything. Like it's been in the works. I was on this for 4 months, and they're attempting to do it. But if you could AI that thing, that's a lot of help for the entire gaming industry, who all are eventually use Microsoft.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I did not work on that problem per se, but I know like some people who worked on similar stuff. Like for instance, there is this person called Miltos Alamanus. He is in MSR Cambridge, UK. I think he does a lot of this dependency analysis, like graph-based dependency, AI, things like that. If I remember correctly, but
Yeah.
I haven't looked at it.
Yeah, exactly. The graph-based stuff. Since the main thing is people have to manually specify it right now. If we could get the AI to go in, and even if you're not fully right, but you can just say, hey, this isn't even close. Like, again, pick your platform, or again, this is probably my fault because I was part of the build team, but we had someone change a PowerPoint, commit it to source, and then it built the whole game. So that was on us. But stuff like that can happen pretty often because these games just get massive. So anytime, could we even just say, if it's within this 10% of files it might be related to, go ahead and build, because usually it won't. It'll be small changes, but then huge swaths of stuff built anyways.
Right. Awesome. Probably you should join Microsoft and do it.
I was just going to say, Derek, you should apply to Microsoft. It's such a good question. Or do a master. You're a master's student right now?
No, undergrad.
Yeah, I see. You could do a research project on that for sure.
Or you can do internship to start with.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go look.
Yeah, and maybe Chandra can put you in touch with somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. Yeah.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, and actually, with that, we're past the half hour, and the question I was going to ask you, Chandra, is a closing question. Actually, I have 3, but I'll just ask one. Do you have any advice for the students about what they should be learning as being students? Anything that you didn't learn that you wish you had learned as a PhD student yourself? Or maybe any advice on doing internship at Microsoft, since we've gone talking about that a little bit. So just sort of general advice, because you've done a master's and a PhD, and you've had this great career so far. What kind of advice would you share?
That's actually a tough question, I would say.
Yeah. Do you think doing internship at Microsoft is a good thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, not just Microsoft, right? Like any I think industry experience is good, like Facebook, Google, Amazon, like all of these are like great companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, also like it's a personal choice, I would say. Like that's why I'm slightly struggling to answer that question, right? Because from the beginning, I think I always am slightly biased towards building things, like being hands-on and stuff like that. So I prefer like that kind of work and environments. So, so like if you're into like building things, yeah, like probably joining some companies for internships obviously is like a good idea. It brings like a different perspective, right? And suddenly, right, like when I was a student, right, like when I was a student, like I always used to like have this thinking like, okay, I do things like in a certain way and they just magically scale out. But when I actually entered a company, right, it's like an ocean, right? So there's like so much stuff to learn. Sometimes you have this notion of, I know everything and, this stuff works, right? Like suddenly like everything is like broken apart, right? So that was, I think for me, like a greatest learning, like, so yeah, like just keep yourself close to where you want to go, right?
That's great advice. I think very, very good, very valid. I think we have quite a mix of students here, some graduate students, but a lot of Bachelor of Software Engineering students, and many of them love to build things too. And so that's great advice, just to, for them to follow their passion, right?
Right,
So
and also in Delft, right, for instance, Georgios, right?
Yeah.
Georgios, like I like a lot of his work. Like he actually built this platform called GHTorrent, on top of which a lot of people do like write papers and do a lot of analysis, right? Of course, like Microsoft kind of helped him. Like he collaborated with Microsoft, but what he achieved, like sitting in a university, right, is like remarkable, right? So we always sometimes think that, oh, you need to go to this company or somewhere like to do cool things, right? But that's not really true, right?
Yeah. I was actually at Delft on sabbatical when Georges was writing the GH torrent, and I remember he came into my office and he said, well, I'm doing this thing, and I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
It was so cool. It really did make a big difference. I know Nicole's on the call. I'm sure she's got some things to say about GitHub data later on, but the other question I was going to ask you, and I'll steal another minute, and you can think about it and not answer it. Yeah, Nicole says, yeah, I have thoughts. I don't know how she's staying quiet, actually. But maybe if you think of any ideas that the students could do for their second project. So the second project coming up is replicating an empirical study or doing a new study. And of course, they only have a few weeks, so it can't be at the scale of a master's. But if you think of anything cool or you have any ideas, maybe you can share them with us. You can throw them in the chat or share them with me and I can add them.
Yeah. Probably I'll chat with you like offline, like if
sure.
I have something.
Yeah. So Chandra, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really been a great pleasure to have you here. And I know the students were very, very excited to meet you. And so with that, I'll invite people to turn on their cameras, or we do this from New Zealand is the way that you say thank you, or we do sparkly hands or we clap or whatever. But we are very grateful. Thank you for coming, and thank you for all of the great insights you shared with us. And talk to you soon. And you're welcome to stick around for the rest of the day.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, thanks for having me. Yep.
Thank you.